Hey guy, tonight we are talking about how the Great Wall of China was really built. The myth and the reality. Stretching over mountains, deserts, and grasslands, the Great Wall of China is perhaps the most enduring architectural symbol of endurance and power. Rather, it is a series of interconnected fortifications, trenches, natural barriers, and standalone walls built over 2,000 years by different dynasties, each with their own priorities and construction techniques. It evolved from simple earthen ramparts to sophisticated brick and stone fortresses during the Ming Dynasty. We will journey through time to see how the Great Wall was truly built, from the early earthworks of the Warring States period to the refined brickwork of the Ming Dynasty. We'll explore the materials, manpower, and techniques used in the centuries before China's first emperor united the land. The country was a patchwork of competing kingdoms, each fighting for survival and dominance. They were made of rammed earth layers of soil compacted between wooden frames until they hardened into solid barriers. While these walls lacked the durability of stone or brick, they were surprisingly effective. These walls were often reinforced with watchtowers, wooden structures that allowed guards to spot approaching raiders from a distance. When fires or smoke signals were lit atop these towers, the labor force consisted primarily of peasants and conscripts. Workers filled wooden frames with loose soil, gravel, and clay, then pounded the material with wooden or stone mallets until it was compacted into a dense, solid layer. This process was repeated, layer upon layer, until the wall rose to the desired height, sometimes reaching 6 to 8 meters. While this method was effective in dry climates, they were also connected to fortified passes, heavily guarded gates that allowed trade and travel, but could be shut at the first sign of trouble. Sections of the wall built in wetter regions often required regular maintenance to prevent erosion. Drafted from rural villages during the off-season of farming, how to adapt construction methods to different terrains, and how to maintain such massive structures laid the foundation for all future efforts. It was a time of experimentation where engineers tested what worked and what didn't. When Qin Shi Huang rose to power, he inherited not just a fragmented country, but also a blueprint for the colossal wall system that would bear his name. The states of Zhao, Yan, and Qin were particularly known for their walls, many of which would later be incorporated into the first unified Great Wall under the Qin Dynasty, marked the beginning of a new chapter in both Chinese history and the story of the Great Wall. After centuries of relentless warfare, the Qin state emerged victorious over its rivals, but from the Xiongnu and other nomadic tribes roaming the Mongolian steppe. Workers endured long hours with primitive tools, carrying heavy loads of stone and earth up treacherous mountain paths. Food and water were scarce, and the harsh northern climate, scorching summers and freezing winters, claimed countless lives. These tribes were skilled horsemen and raiders who could strike with speed and disappear across the open plains. A woman who wept at the wall until it collapsed to reveal her husband's body reflects the suffering of those who built it. While no archaeological evidence supports this legend, it speaks to the wall's dark history as a place of human sacrifice and suffering. The emperor's solution was bold connect and expand the existing walls built by the conquered states into one massive defensive barrier. Garrison stations were established to house soldiers and store weapons, grain, and other essentials, unifying China in 221 BCE, but it was far from complete by the time Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BCE. It demonstrated not only the feasibility of building large-scale fortifications, but also the political power needed to mobilize such a workforce. The wall became a symbol of both imperial ambition and the tremendous human cost of centralized rule. His successors faced internal rebellions and the collapse of the Qin dynasty just a few years later. Much of the wall fell into disrepair during this chaotic period, but its concept, an immense barrier against northern invasions, endured. The Qin wall was mostly composed of rammed earth, a method well suited to the lowest soil of northern China. Engineers erected large wooden frames, filled them with soil, sand, and gravel, and then compacted these layers using wooden or stone mallets. When dried, this material became almost as hard as rock. For the first time, a Chinese ruler was attempting to create a single. These towers allowed soldiers to send messages across great distances, using smoke signals by day and fire beacons by night. In this way, news of an enemy incursion could travel hundreds of kilometers within hours, enabling rapid military responses. Large stones were used as the wall's foundation or to form the exterior surfaces. Mountains, rivers, and cliffs served as natural barriers, reducing the need for continuous construction in some areas. The Qin engineers also built watchtowers and fortified gates at regular intervals, creating a defensive network that allowed soldiers to monitor the horizon for signs of enemy movement. Centralized defense system that would protect the entire northern frontier of a unified China. Historical records, particularly Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, provide detailed descriptions of this monumental project. With this unification came a desire to solidify borders, deter nomadic raids, and demonstrate the authority of the newly established Qin Empire. Historical estimates suggest that 300,000 to 500,000 laborers were conscripted for the project, though some accounts claim the number reached 1 million. These workers were drawn from diverse groups. The walls built by the earlier warring states became the foundation for an unprecedented undertaking, the creation of the first long wall that stretched across northern China. For instance, some of the earthen fortifications built by Zhao in modern-day Hebei province were linked to other sections during the 3rd century BCE. Tools were primitive wooden spades, stone hammers, wicker baskets for moving earth, and provided vantage points for defending soldiers. Most importantly, these walls symbolize the strength and determination of the states that built them. A strong wall could deter potential invaders simply by its presence. Workers transported soil in hand-carried baskets or dragged logs up steep slopes to create scaffolding. Nearby settlements could prepare for attacks. When properly compacted, rammed earth became as tough as modern concrete, capable of standing for centuries if shielded from heavy rainfall. In fact, some sections of these ancient walls still survive in northern China, their weathered forms blending into the landscape. This era, known as the Spring and Autumn period and the subsequent Warring States period, built in the modern Shandong province. Dating as far back as the 7th century BCE, this wall stretched over 600 kilometers. Archaeological studies show it was built with a core of rammed earth and topped with wooden palisades. Its purpose was simple: to keep out invading forces and to clearly mark territorial boundaries. Was marked by relentless warfare. States like Qi, Wei, Zhao, Yan, Qin, and Sikshu invested heavily in defensive structures to protect their fertile lands and trade routes from both rival Chinese states and nomadic incursions from the north. The lives of the workers who endured its hardships, and the cultural and military strategies behind its construction, with designs adapted to local geography and available resources. We must first go back to the fragmented world of pre-imperial China, where rival states competed for dominance, and walls began as modest lines of defense against raiders and rival warlords. For centuries, it has been described as a single, unbroken line, an immense serpent of stone and brick winding its way across the vast Chinese landscape. Its construction required enormous logistical coordination, innovation, and tragically, human suffering. Millions of laborers, peasants, prisoners, soldiers contributed to this monumental task. The Great Wall is better described as a system of defenses, ramparts, watchtowers, signal beacons, and natural obstacles like mountains and rivers. The modern vision of the wall as a continuous line of stone is mostly the result of Ming Dynasty. engineering a phase that came more than 1,500 years after the first fortifications were raised, many losing their lives in the process. Popular imagination paints a picture of thousands of workers toiling day and night. The answer lies in China's geography and history. The fertile plains of the Yellow River were often vulnerable to invasions by nomadic tribes from the north. To defend their settlements, ancient Chinese states began erecting protective barriers as early as the 7th century BCE. Over time, these local efforts grew into a network of fortifications that, under the first emperor Qin Shi Huang, were connected into what could be called a single Great Wall. Building a wall so strong it could be seen from space? But the reality is far more complex, both in its history and in its construction. The Great Wall was not built in one era, nor by a single emperor's decree. What is most fascinating about the Great Wall is not only its vast scale, but also the human story behind it. The first question to ask is, why build such a wall at all? Yet, calling it a wall is slightly misleading. In this narrative, to understand this colossal achievement, 2. Early walls of the warring states, the Great Wall of China did not begin as a single wall, it began as many. In the centuries before China's first emperor united the land, the country was a patchwork of competing kingdoms, each fighting for survival and dominance. They were made of rammed earth layers of soil compacted between wooden frames until they hardened into solid barriers. Dating as far back as the 7th century BCE, this wall stretched over 600 kilometers. Archaeological studies show it was built with a core of rammed earth and topped with wooden palisades. Tools were primitive wooden spades, stone hammers, wicker baskets for moving earth. Workers transported soil in hand-carried baskets or dragged logs up steep slopes to create scaffolding. Its purpose was simple: to keep out invading forces and to clearly mark territorial boundaries. Workers filled wooden frames with loose soil, gravel, and clay, then pounded the material with wooden or stone mallets until it was compacted into a dense, solid layer. This process was repeated layer upon layer until the wall rose to the desired height, sometimes reaching 6 to 8 meters. While this method was effective in dry climates, sections of the wall built in wetter regions often required regular maintenance to prevent erosion. And how to maintain such massive structures laid the foundation for all future efforts. It was a time of experimentation, where engineers tested what worked and what didn't. When Qin Shi Huang rose to power, he inherited not just a fragmented country, but also a blueprint for the colossal wall system that would bear his name. While these walls lacked the durability of stone or brick, they were surprisingly effective. The states of Zhao, Yan, and Chen were particularly known for their walls, many of which would later be incorporated into the first unified Great Wall under the Qin Dynasty. For instance, some of the earthen fortifications built by Zhao in modern day Hebei province were linked to other sections during the 3rd century BCE. These walls were often reinforced with watchtowers, wooden structures that allowed guards to spot approaching raiders from a distance, and provided vantage points for defending soldiers. Passes, heavily guarded gates that allowed trade and travel but could be shut at the first sign of trouble. Most importantly, these walls symbolize the strength and determination of the states that built them. A strong wall could deter potential invaders simply by its presence. When fires or smoke signals were lit atop these towers, nearby settlements could prepare for attacks. When properly compacted, rammed earth became as tough as modern concrete, capable of standing for centuries if shielded from heavy rainfall. In fact, some sections of these ancient walls still survive in northern China, their weathered forms blending into the landscape. This era, known as the Spring and Autumn period, and the subsequent Warring States period, was marked by relentless warfare. States like Qi, Wei, Zhao, Yan, Qin, and Xiaoju invested heavily in defensive structures to protect their fertile lands and trade routes from both rival Chinese states and nomadic incursions from the north. The first walls. The earliest walls were not the towering fortresses we imagine today. One of the earliest and most famous pre-imperial fortifications was the Great Wall of Qi, built in the modern Shandong province. The state of Wei also constructed walls in the 4th century BCE, particularly to defend against the formidable Xiongnu tribes. Construction methods and manpower. Building these early walls was a grueling process. The labor force consisted primarily of peasants and conscripts, drafted from rural villages during the off-season of farming. The technique of ramming earth was deceptively simple yet labor-intensive. Purpose of the walls. The walls of the Warring States period were not designed for complete isolation but for strategic defense. They slowed down invading armies, funneled them into predictable routes. In many cases, the walls were paired with moats or trenches on their northern sides, creating another layer of defense. They were also connected to fortify the legacy of the Warring States walls. By the end of the Warring States period, several kingdoms had developed extensive defensive networks. The lessons learned during this period, how to mobilize labor, how to adapt construction methods to different terrains. 3. Qin Shi Huang and the First Unified Great Wall. The rise of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, marked the beginning of a new chapter in both Chinese history and the story of the Great Wall. After centuries of relentless warfare, the Qin state emerged victorious over its rivals, unifying China in 221 BCE. With this unification came a desire to solidify borders, deter nomadic raids, and demonstrate the authority of the newly established Qin Empire. The walls built by the earlier warring states became the foundation for an unprecedented undertaking, the creation of the first long wall that stretched across northern China. A vision of defense and power. Emperor Qin Shi Huang understood that the greatest threat to his empire did not come from within, but from the Xiongnu and other nomadic tribes roaming the Mongolian steppe. These tribes were skilled horsemen and raiders who could strike with speed and disappear across the open plains. The emperor's solution was bold connect and expand the existing walls, built by the conquered states, into one massive defensive barrier. This unified Great Wall would not only serve as a shield, but also as a symbol of imperial might. For the first time, a Chinese ruler was attempting to create a single, centralized defense system that would protect the entire northern frontier of a unified China. Historical records, particularly Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian, provide detailed descriptions of this monumental project. Mobilizing a massive workforce, the construction of the Qin Wall was a colossal endeavor that demanded enormous manpower. Historical estimates suggest that 300,000 to 500,000 laborers were conscripted for the project, though some accounts claim the number reached 1 million. These workers were drawn from diverse groups: soldiers who provided both labor and defense, peasants pressed into service as part of their tax obligations, convicts and enslaved people punished with hard labor. The wall was built under brutal conditions. Workers endured long hours with primitive tools, carrying heavy loads of stone and earth up treacherous mountain paths. Food and water were scarce, and the harsh northern climate, scorching summers and freezing winters, claimed countless lives. It is said that those who perished during construction were buried nearby or in legends within the wall itself. The famous story of Ming, a woman who wept at the wall until it collapsed to reveal her husband's body, reflects the suffering of those who built it. While no archaeological evidence supports this legend, it speaks to the wall's dark history as a place of human sacrifice and suffering. Construction methods under the Qin. Unlike the later Ming sections built with bricks and stones, the Qin Wall was mostly composed of rammed earth, a method well suited to the lowest soil of northern China. Engineers erected large wooden frames filled them with soil, sand, and gravel, and then compacted these layers using wooden or stone mallets. When dried, this material became almost as hard as rock. In regions where stone was abundant, particularly in mountainous terrain, large stones were used as the wall's foundation or to form the exterior surfaces. The Qin engineers also built watchtowers and fortified gates at regular intervals, creating a defensive network that allowed soldiers to monitor the horizon for signs of enemy movement. The wall was not a single, uninterrupted line. Instead, it was a series of linked fortifications adapted to the natural contours of the land. Mountains, rivers, and cliffs served as natural barriers, reducing the need for continuous construction in some areas. Strategic design and communication. One of the most innovative aspects of the Qin Wall was its system of signal towers. Positioned on elevated points, these towers allowed soldiers to send messages across great distances, using smoke signals by day and fire beacons by night. In this way, news of an enemy incursion could travel hundreds of kilometers within hours, enabling rapid military responses. The wall also functioned as a logistical barrier. Roads and pathways ran along its length, allowing the swift movement of troops and supplies. Garrison stations were established to house soldiers and store weapons, grain, and other essentials. The wall's legacy in the Qin era. The Qin Wall is often referred to as the first true Great Wall, but it was far from complete by the time Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BC. His successors faced internal rebellions and the collapse of the Qin Dynasty just a few years later. Much of the wall fell into disrepair during this chaotic period, but its concept, an immense barrier against northern invasions, endured. The Qin Wall set the stage for all future construction efforts. It demonstrated not only the feasibility of building large-scale fortifications, but also the political power needed to mobilize such a workforce. The wall became a symbol of both imperial ambition and the tremendous human cost of centralized rule. 4. The Han Dynasty expands the wall and the Silk Road. With the fall of the short-lived Qin Dynasty, China plunged into a period of civil unrest until it was unified once more by the Han Dynasty. Founded in 206 BCE, the Han rulers inherited not only the idea of empire, but also the vision of a defended northern frontier. While the Qin had begun the concept of a Great Wall, it was the Han Dynasty that expanded it, dramatically transforming it into a sophisticated frontier system intertwined with military outposts, communication towers, and trade routes that would eventually become the Silk Road. A strategic vision. The early Han emperors, especially Emperor Wu of Han, viewed the northern border with growing concern. The Xiongnu Confederation, a powerful nomadic empire to the north, posed a constant threat through raids and territorial pressure. The Han court tried diplomacy first, offering gifts and intermarriage alliances, but after repeated violations, they turned to military action. To push back the Xiongnu and secure the northern frontier, Emperor Wu launched a massive expansion of the wall system. He sent generals and tens of thousands of soldiers into the wild northern territories, not only to fight but to build. The wall marched west. Under the Han, the wall's footprint stretched far beyond the Qin boundaries. It extended westward through the Hexi Corridor, a narrow strip of land in modern-day Gansu province bordered by mountains and desert. This was a key strategic region. Whoever controlled the Hexi Corridor controlled access to Central Asia, and with it, lucrative trade. To protect this corridor and the merchant caravans that passed through, the Han built new stretches of wall using local materials, including sand, reeds, tamped earth, and desert gravel. In some areas, the wall was reinforced with bundled branches and clay, while in wetter regions, rammed earth techniques prevailed. Archaeological findings reveal that the Han walls were thinner than those of the Ming period, but often supported by deep moats, watchtowers, and fortified passes. These features turned the wall from a static defense into a dynamic frontier system. Han garrisons, stationed in key outposts along the wall, were responsible for maintaining order, guarding merchant caravans, and sending early warnings of enemy movement. Innovation, signal towers, and communication. The Han perfected the beacon tower system introduced in the Qin era. Towers were spaced at regular intervals along the wall, typically within viewing distance of each other, often between 2 to 5 kilometers apart, depending on the terrain. These towers used smoke signals, flags, mirrors, and drums to relay messages rapidly across the frontier. Each type of smoke had a different meaning. One puff might indicate a small raiding party, while 3 puffs might mean a major invasion was underway. In emergencies, a warning could travel over 500 kilometers in a single day, allowing frontier commanders to coordinate reinforcements and protect civilian settlements in time. Life along the Han Wall. Unlike the Qin era, where forced labor was common, the Han Dynasty increasingly relied on professional soldiers, convicted criminals, and border settlers to build and maintain the wall. These soldiers were often stationed at remote outposts for years at a time. Life was hard, garrisons were cold, food was scarce, and isolation was the norm. Some were allowed to bring their families, giving rise to small communities along the wall. To support these troops, the Han state created a vast supply chain system, transporting grain, salt, tools, and livestock from the interior to the wall via military roads. Fortified granaries were built into the wall system itself, allowing commanders to store food in case of siege or winter shortages. The Silk Road begins. One of the most lasting impacts of Han Wall building was the integration of the wall with the Silk Road trade network. As the Western Wall extended deeper into Central Asia, it offered protection not just to soldiers, but to merchants carrying silk, spices, ceramics, jade, and paper to and from places like India, Persia, and even the Roman Empire. The wall created safe corridors where trade flourished. Han frontier officials collected tolls, regulated caravans, and built way stations along the road where travelers could rest and resupply. In effect, the wall became more than a military barrier. It was a commercial artery, pumping wealth into China while projecting Han influence far beyond its borders. Legacy of the Han Wall. By the end of the Han Dynasty in the 3rd century CE, the wall had grown to become one of the largest construction projects of the ancient world. Though much of it was made from perishable materials and has since eroded, its strategic importance, geographic reach, and economic impact were profound. The Han Wall's integration with the Silk Road marked a turning point in Chinese history. No longer was the wall only a line of defense, it was a tool of statecraft, commerce, and imperial projection. Later dynasties would follow the example set by the Han, expanding, rebuilding, and reinventing the wall as the needs of the empire evolved. The northern dynasties, Sui and Tang. Walls in fragmented times. Following the fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 CE, China entered a prolonged era of fragmentation and political upheaval. The once unified empire splintered into competing kingdoms during the Three Kingdoms period, followed by the Jin Dynasty and the chaotic era of the northern and southern dynasties. This period saw shifting priorities for wall construction, with some dynasties maintaining and expanding fortifications, while others allowed sections to decay as they focused on internal conflicts or different defensive strategies. The decline of centralized wall building. The centuries following the Han collapse were marked by constant warfare between rival states, many of which lacked the resources or centralized control needed for grand construction projects. The Great Wall, as it existed under the Han, was no longer maintained on a large scale. Instead, local warlords and regional states built or repaired smaller defensive walls to protect their immediate territories. For instance, the Cao Wei state and the Northern Wei, Dynasty repaired key sections of the Han Wall to defend against nomadic groups like the Rurin Khaganate. The Northern Wei, in particular, invested heavily in frontier defenses, rebuilding over 1,600 kilometers of walls and fortresses during their rule, the Northern Qi dynasty's Great Wall. One of the most significant wall-building efforts of this era came during the Northern Qi dynasty. Facing relentless raids from the Turkic tribes to the north, the Northern Qi rulers embarked on a massive wall-building campaign. Historical sources suggest that they constructed or repaired 1,500 kilometers of wall in just 7 years, employing over 1.8 million workers, a staggering figure that demonstrates both the urgency of defense and the enormous human cost involved. The Northern Qi Wall was notable for its stone construction in mountainous areas and the use of rammed earth elsewhere. Watchtowers and fortresses were built at regular intervals, and the wall was reinforced with moats and trench systems in certain vulnerable areas. Unlike the walls of earlier dynasties, the Northern Qi sections were built with a more continuous design, indicating a shift toward a more unified defensive strategy. The Sui dynasty, a brief resurgence. The Sui dynasty, which reunited China after centuries of division, also recognized the importance of the northern defenses. Emperor Yangdi ordered the repair and extension of walls in the north to protect against the eastern Turks. The Sui, however, are better remembered for their ambitious infrastructure projects like the Grand Canal, which often overshadowed their wall-building efforts. During the Sui reign, the empire used forced labor on a massive scale, with conscripts drawn from all corners of China. Building or repairing walls involved tens of thousands of workers, many of whom died under the grueling conditions. These hardships, combined with heavy taxation and military campaigns, contributed to widespread resentment and ultimately the fall of the Sui dynasty, the Tang dynasty, and open frontier policy. The Tang dynasty took a notably different approach to northern defenses. Known as one of China's golden ages, the Tang Empire was both militarily powerful and diplomatically skilled. Rather than relying heavily on walls, the Tang expanded their territory deep into Central Asia, pushing beyond the traditional frontiers and establishing buffer states against nomadic incursions. Tang rulers preferred a policy of defense through offense. Their armies patrolled the northern steppes, and their alliances with nomadic groups often rendered static walls less necessary. While they did maintain certain fortifications built by earlier dynasties, the Tang invested less in large-scale wall construction compared to their predecessors. Trade along the Silk Road flourished during this period, and the Tang often relied on mobile armies and fortresses rather than continuous walls. Wall-building techniques during this era. Although wall construction was not as extensive under the Tang, the techniques developed during this period became more refined. Builders improved methods of compacting earth, layering clay and gravel for greater durability, and incorporating stone foundations to prevent erosion. Watchtowers and signal systems continued to evolve, becoming more sophisticated with better visibility and faster communication. A legacy of fragmentation and experimentation. The centuries between the fall of the Han and the rise of the Tang were a time of experimentation and regional adaptation. While no single wall system dominated the landscape, the knowledge of wall-building techniques persisted and even improved during these centuries. By the end of the Tang dynasty in the 10th century, the Great Wall concept remained deeply ingrained in the Chinese strategic mindset, waiting to be revived on a grand scale by future dynasties. The Song, Qin, and Yuan dynasties, walls in the Age of Conquest. The centuries following the fall of the Tang dynasty marked another turbulent chapter in Chinese history. This era witnessed the rise of powerful northern empires and the eventual Mongol conquest that created one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. During this time, the concept of the Great Wall evolved, but large-scale construction projects were less frequent. Instead, walls were rebuilt or fortified selectively, depending on the political and military needs of the ruling dynasties. The Song Dynasty, defensive challenges. The Song Dynasty faced a unique challenge in Chinese history. While the Tang Dynasty had projected power far into Central Asia, the Song rulers controlled a smaller territory, with much of northern China falling under the control of rival states like the Liao Dynasty and later the Jin Dynasty. The Song were known more for their technological and cultural innovations than for military strength. Gunpowder, movable type printing, and advanced metallurgy all flourished under the Song. But defending their borders against the nomadic Khitan and Jurchen peoples was a constant struggle. Rather than building massive new walls, the Song relied on fortified cities, rivers, and smaller-scale defensive works. Some wall building did occur, particularly in the northern frontier regions, but the Song generally preferred a combination of diplomacy and strategic fortifications near critical passes rather than trying to rebuild a continuous wall. The Great Wall, as a unified defense line, was largely neglected during this period. The Jin Dynasty, rebuilding northern defenses. The Jin Dynasty, founded by the Jurchen people, conquered large portions of northern China from the Song. The Jin were familiar with the threats posed by steppe nomads, as they themselves came from the north. To secure their rule, they undertook several wall-building campaigns, especially to the north of Beijing and across Manchuria. The Jin walls were often constructed using earthworks reinforced with wooden palisades, a traditional method that was effective for controlling movement and slowing invaders. These walls were not as monumental as the Qin or Han structures, but they were strategically placed near passes and choke points. Historical records suggest that the Jin invested heavily in garrison towns and signal tower systems, which allowed them to respond quickly to incursions. The rise of the Mongols and the Yuan dynasty. The arrival of the Mongols in the 13th century changed the military landscape of Asia forever. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongol armies swept across the steppes and conquered vast territories, including northern China. The Great Wall offered little resistance to their highly mobile cavalry, which could simply bypass static defenses by finding unguarded routes or overwhelming isolated garrisons. When the Mongols established the Yuan dynasty, they saw little need for massive walls. Their empire stretched from China to Europe, and their strength lay in mobility, not in fortifications. Rather than building new walls, the Yuan focused on maintaining fortified cities and administrative centers, leaving much of the earlier Great Wall in disrepair. The Great Wall during the Mongol era. While the Mongols did not prioritize wall construction, they did utilize existing fortifications for administrative purposes and to control local populations. Certain wall sections were repaired to mark borders or manage the movement of goods and people, but the idea of a continuous barrier was largely abandoned. Interestingly, the Mongols' disdain for walls would later influence Chinese thinking during the early Ming dynasty. The catastrophic invasions by Mongol forces in the 13th century taught the Chinese that walls alone could not stop highly organized nomadic armies. However, once the Yuan dynasty fell and native Chinese rule was restored, walls would once again become a central focus of defense strategy, this time rebuilt on an even grander scale. Technological advances in construction. Despite the lack of large-scale wall projects during this era, advances in construction materials and techniques continued. The Song and Jin dynasties developed stronger forms of lime mortar, improved brick-making kilns, and experimented with stone-faced walls in mountainous regions. These innovations would prove invaluable when the Ming dynasty undertook its ambitious rebuilding of the Great Wall. The stage is set for the Ming Wall. By the late 14th century, The Yuan dynasty collapsed under the weight of internal strife and peasant uprisings, paving the way for the rise of the Ming dynasty. The Ming rulers were determined to prevent another Mongol resurgence. To achieve this, they planned not just to repair the old walls, but to transform them into a massive stone and brick fortress system, unlike anything the world had seen before. The lessons learned during the Song, Jin, and Yuan periods about the limitations of walls, the importance of communication systems, and the need for durable materials would all come together in the Ming dynasty's monumental efforts. The Ming dynasty's monumental wall. The Ming dynasty marked the most ambitious and iconic phase of Great Wall construction. When the Ming founders rose to power after overthrowing the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, they faced a harsh reality. The Mongols, though expelled, were still a formidable force beyond the northern frontier. Determined to defend their restored empire, the Ming emperors launched a monumental effort to rebuild and expand the wall into the grand structure we most recognize today, a shift in strategy. Unlike their predecessors, the Ming rulers understood that nomadic horsemen could not be easily defeated by mobile armies alone. The Mongols had repeatedly demonstrated the ability to bypass or overrun small fortifications. To counter this, the Ming adopted a defense-in-depth strategy, fortifying key regions with permanent stone and brick walls and heavily armed garrisons. The Ming Wall was not simply a defensive line. It was an integrated military system. It included fortified gates, beacon towers, signal platforms, watchtowers, and garrison towns, all connected by roads that allowed troops and supplies to move quickly along the frontier. Scale and scope. The Ming Wall was far more extensive and formidable than any earlier version. While the Qin and Han walls were primarily earthen structures, the Ming rebuilt huge sections using quarried stone and kiln-fired bricks. These walls were much stronger and more resistant to erosion, designed to endure centuries of weather and warfare. The total length of the Ming-era wall, including all its branches, trenches, and natural barriers, is estimated at 8,850 kilometers, nearly the distance from Beijing to London. Not all of it was a single continuous barrier. Instead, the wall included multiple lines of fortifications in strategic areas, particularly near Beijing and other vulnerable passes. Materials and construction techniques. The Ming engineers made extensive use of local materials, which varied by region. In mountainous areas, granite and limestone were quarried for the outer walls, while rubble was used for the core. In flat plains, kiln-fired bricks were favored, bonded together with a remarkably durable mortar made from lime mixed with sticky rice starch. This sticky rice mortar provided both strength and water resistance, a significant innovation in Chinese construction. Timber, iron, and tiles were used for gates, watchtowers, and roof structures. Construction was performed in stages. Workers first dug foundations and filled them with rubble or tamped earth. Large stone blocks formed the base, while bricks or cut stone were used to create a smooth outer surface. The wall was typically 7 to 9 meters tall and 4 to 6 meters wide at the base, tapering slightly toward the top. Some areas near critical passes were even larger. Manpower and logistics. The workforce for the Ming Wall was massive. Historical records suggest that hundreds of thousands of soldiers, peasants, convicts, and artisans were conscripted to build it. The Ming military was directly involved in the project, with entire garrisons assigned to construction and maintenance duties. The logistics of the operation were staggering. Bricks and stone had to be manufactured locally or transported over long distances, often carried on the backs of animals or people through rugged terrain. Kilns were built along the construction route to produce the millions of bricks needed. Food, water, tools, and timber were also brought in to support the workforce. The logistics of the operation were staggering. Bricks and stone had to be manufactured locally or transported over long distances, often carried on the backs of animals or people through rugged terrain. Kilns were built along the construction route to produce the millions of bricks needed. Food, water, tools, and timber were also brought in to support the workforce. Beacon towers and military organization. A critical feature of the Ming Wall was its beacon tower system, which allowed for rapid communication across vast distances. The towers were placed every few kilometers, especially in regions where enemy incursions were likely. Using smoke signals during the day and fire at night, soldiers could warn of an attack and relay messages to distant garrisons within hours. The wall was divided into defensive zones, each guarded by a local military command. Fortified gates like Shanhai Pass and Jiang Pass near Beijing were heavily armed and capable of withstanding prolonged sieges. Some sections, such as the famous Battling and Nottianyu, were built with multiple layers of walls and high parapets to give defenders a tactical advantage. Cultural and political significance. The Ming Wall was not only a military structure, but also a powerful symbol of national strength and unity. It projected the image of an empire that was not only able to defend itself, but also to mobilize resources on an unprecedented scale. Foreign envoys and traders arriving from the north were often awed by the sight of the towering walls and fortresses, which served as a visual reminder of the Ming Dynasty's authority. Challenges and limitations. Despite its grandeur, the Ming Wall was not an impenetrable barrier. Skilled cavalry forces could still bypass it through unguarded routes, and maintaining such a long structure required enormous resources. Nevertheless, it significantly reduced raids and gave the Ming army the ability to control movement along the frontier. By the early 17th century, however, internal corruption, economic decline, and natural disasters weakened the Ming state. The wall alone could not stop the rising power of the Manchu, who eventually breached the gates at Shanhai Pass in 1644, marking the fall of the Ming Dynasty and the rise of the Qing. 8. Life on the Wall, Soldiers, Settlers, and Stories. While the Great Wall of China is often viewed as a lifeless structure of stone and brick, during the Ming era, it was a vibrant, living frontier filled with soldiers, laborers, merchants, and families. It was not just a line of defense, but a world of its own, with bustling garrisons, watchtowers, and even small villages growing around its key passes, the garrison system. To maintain the Great Wall, the Ming Dynasty established a sophisticated military garrison system known as the 9 border garrisons. These garrisons were strategically located along the northern frontier, from Liaoning in the east to Gansu in the west, ensuring that the entire length of the wall could be patrolled and defended. Each garrison commanded a network of fortresses, watchtowers, and smaller outposts. Soldiers were stationed at key passes, while patrol units roamed between towers to check for breaches or signs of enemy activity. Communication between garrisons was maintained through the beacon tower system smoke by day, fire by night, enabling rapid coordination across hundreds of kilometers. The life of a soldier. Serving as a soldier on the wall was often grueling. The soldiers were responsible not only for defending their post, but also for maintaining and repairing the wall. During harsh winters in northern China, temperatures could plummet to well below freezing, while summers brought scorching heat. Food supplies were limited, consisting mainly of millet, wheat, dried vegetables, and occasionally meat or fish when available. To keep morale high, soldiers engaged in archery practice, horseback riding, and drills. They were trained to repel raids by nomadic cavalry, who were skilled at fast strikes. Life on the wall was marked by long stretches of boredom, punctuated by moments of intense danger. Many soldiers served for years or even decades. Some were allowed to bring their families to live in nearby villages. creating small communities that supported the military presence with farming, trade, and crafts, settlers, and farmers. To support the large military population, the Ming government implemented a system of military agricultural colonies. Soldiers and their families were given plots of land near the wall to cultivate grain, vegetables, and livestock. This not only provided food for the troops, but also created a stable civilian presence along the frontier. These settlements often resembled small towns with markets, blacksmiths, carpenters, and other tradespeople. Over time, some garrisons developed into permanent towns with bustling economies. Merchants traveled along the wall routes to sell goods, creating an unexpected network of trade along this military barrier. Watchtowers and daily routine. Key watchtowers were the nerve centers of the Great Wall, positioned every 3 to 5 kilometers. These structures housed small groups of soldiers who acted as lookouts. A typical day involved scanning the horizon for movement, maintaining the tower, and sending signals when necessary. In times of peace, the towers were relatively quiet, but during an alert, the soldiers could light fires or release smoke signals made from burning wolf dung or straw mixed with sulfur, which created a thick black smoke visible for miles. Folklore and legends. Life on the Great Wall gave rise to many stories and legends. The most famous is the tale of Meng Jiangnu, whose husband was sent to work on the wall and died from the harsh conditions. Her grief was so powerful that part of the wall is said to have collapsed when she cried against it. While this story is largely symbolic, it reflects the real suffering endured by countless laborers and soldiers during construction. Another popular belief was that the Great Wall was haunted by the spirits of those who perished building it. Workers and soldiers often left offerings, such as incense, food, or coins at certain sections of the wall to honor the dead and seek protection. Cultural and strategic importance. The wall was more than a military structure. It was a cultural frontier. Along its length, Chinese civilization met the nomadic cultures of the steppe. Trade, conflict, and cultural exchange all took place here. Silk, tea, and ceramics were traded for horses, furs, and other goods brought by the nomadic tribes. For the Ming emperors, the wall also symbolized the imperial boundary, a clear line between the civilized world of China and the barbarian lands beyond. It was both a psychological and physical barrier, reinforcing the idea of Chinese superiority and unity, the harsh realities. Despite its grandeur, life on the wall was often lonely and harsh. Soldiers could spend months without seeing major action, but still had to endure disease, malnutrition, and isolation. Banditry was common, and poorly supplied garrisons sometimes resorted to foraging or taxing local villagers to survive. Yet, the wall and its garrisons played a critical role in defending the Ming heartland. Without the watchful eyes of its soldiers and the farming communities that supported them, northern China would have been far more vulnerable to invasion. The wall during the Qing Dynasty and the decline of military importance. With the fall of the Ming Dynasty in 1644, the Manchu-led Qing Dynasty took power. The Great Wall, which had served as a mighty symbol of Chinese resistance against the Mongols and other northern tribes, now stood under the rule of those who had once been considered the barbarians the wall was meant to repel. This shift in power fundamentally altered the wall's military role and significance. The fall of the Ming Wall. The Ming Dynasty's Great Wall, despite its formidable structure, ultimately failed to prevent invasion. In 1644, the Manchu forces allied with the Ming general Wu Songui to pass through the Shanhai Pass, a strategic gate where the wall meets the Bohai Sea. This betrayal, rather than a direct military breach, allowed the Manchu army to enter China and capture Beijing, ending Ming rule. The Qing dynasty inherited the Great Wall, but did not rely on it as their Ming predecessors had. The Manchu rulers were not a sedentary agricultural civilization threatened by nomads. They themselves were steppe warriors. Instead of walls, they relied on mobile cavalry and diplomacy to control their vast northern frontier. The Great Wall under the Qing. While the Qing dynasty maintained certain important sections of the wall, especially near Beijing and the major passes, the structure was no longer a centerpiece of imperial defense. Much of the wall fell into disrepair during this period. Without regular maintenance, bricks crumbled, watchtowers collapsed, and large stretches were reclaimed by nature. However, the Qing did use parts of the wall for administrative purposes. The wall's gates, such as those at Battling and Zhuang Pass, served as customs checkpoints for controlling trade and collecting taxes. These gates also functioned as stations for regulating movement between agricultural China and the nomadic grazing lands beyond, a new frontier beyond the wall. The Qing dynasty expanded China's territory far beyond the traditional northern frontier, conquering vast regions including Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Tibet. With these conquests, the Great Wall became less relevant as a border defense. The Manchu emperors such as Kangxi and Qianlong preferred to control the northern steppe through direct military campaigns and alliances with nomadic tribes, rather than relying on static fortifications. Cultural symbolism of the wall. Although the Great Wall had lost much of its military importance, it remained a potent cultural symbol of China's history and perseverance. Scholars and poets of the Qing period often reference the wall in their writings, viewing it as a relic of past dynasties' struggles to defend the empire. Interestingly, while the wall was no longer actively maintained, certain sections near the capital were repaired for ceremonial reasons. Foreign envoys arriving in Beijing were often shown stretches of the wall as a display of China's ancient power and engineering prowess. Encounters with the West. By the 19th century, as Western explorers, traders, and missionaries began traveling deeper into China, the Great Wall became a source of curiosity and fascination. Early Western accounts often described the wall as a wonder of the world, although some were surprised by its ruined state in many regions. Travelers like William Edgar Gile and Sir William Temple wrote extensively about the wall, bringing its legend to global audiences. These writings contributed to the romanticized image of the Great Wall that persists today. The wall's decline. The Qing dynasty's final years were marked by internal rebellion and foreign invasions, culminating in the fall of the Qing in 1912. During this turbulent time, the wall was largely abandoned. Local villagers often dismantled sections of it to use the bricks and stones for building houses, roads, and farms. By the early 20th century, large stretches of the Great Wall were in ruins. Yet, even in its deteriorated state, the wall remained an enduring symbol of China's resilience and historical grandeur. A legacy of transition. The Qing dynasty's relationship with the Great Wall was complex. While they did not prioritize it as a military asset, they preserved its legacy as part of China's cultural identity. The wall shifted from being a functional defense system to a monument of history, a reminder of the struggles and ambitions of earlier dynasties. Rediscovery and restoration in modern times. By the early 20th century, the Great Wall of China had become fragmented and, in many places, nearly lost to nature and human activity. However, the rise of modern nationalism and historical consciousness sparked a renewed interest in this iconic structure, leading to efforts to study, preserve, and restore the wall. Early Western exploration and documentation. Western explorers and scholars during the late 19th and early 20th centuries played a significant role in bringing the Great Wall to global attention. Writers like William Edgar Gile and photographers such as Frank H. Noel documented various stretches of the wall, capturing its immense scale and architectural complexity. Their works introduced the Great Wall to a worldwide audience, establishing it as a symbol of ancient engineering and Chinese civilization. Chinese nationalism and the wall. In the early 20th century, amid political upheaval and the fall of the Qing dynasty. Chinese intellectuals and nationalists began to embrace the Great Wall as a symbol of unity and endurance. The wall came to represent the resilience of the Chinese people in the face of foreign aggression and internal turmoil. This new cultural significance helped spark interest in protecting the wall as a national treasure. Restoration efforts. The mid-20th century marked the beginning of organized restoration efforts. The People's Republic of China, established in 1949, recognized the wall's value as a cultural landmark and a tourist attraction. Government projects began to repair and stabilize key sections, particularly near Beijing and other accessible locations. Restoration techniques varied, with some efforts using modern materials that later sparked controversy for altering the wall's historic authenticity. Despite these debates, restoration helped save many deteriorating sections from collapse. The Great Wall as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In 1987, the Great Wall of China was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, further cementing its global importance. This designation has helped attract international support and funding for conservation projects. Since then, numerous programs have aimed to preserve the wall's structural integrity, prevent illegal construction and stone pilfering, and promote sustainable tourism. Challenges of preservation. Despite these efforts, the Great Wall faces ongoing challenges. Natural erosion, vegetation growth, and human activity continue to threaten its stability. Tourism brings economic benefits, but also risks damage from overuse. Local communities sometimes remove bricks for building materials, and unauthorized development near the wall can undermine its surroundings. Preservationists balance the need to protect the wall with the realities of modern life in nearby regions. The wall in popular culture. Today, the Great Wall is one of the most recognizable landmarks worldwide. It features prominently in films, literature, and art. It symbolizes not only ancient Chinese history, but also the idea of human perseverance and ingenuity. Tourists from around the globe visit sections like Badaling, Mudianyu, and Simatai, marveling at the monumental scale and historical depth of this ancient barrier. Scientific and archaeological advances, modern archaeology and technology have expanded our understanding of the Great Wall. Techniques such as remote sensing, 3D mapping, and ground-penetrating radar reveal hidden sections and help assess structural conditions. Ongoing excavations continue to shed light on construction techniques, historical phases, and the lives of the workers and soldiers associated with the wall, a living monument. The Great Wall of China stands today, not merely as a relic of the past, but as a living monument. It connects ancient history with contemporary culture, reminding us of the complexities of empire building, defense, and human endurance. Efforts to protect and study the wall ensure that it remains a source of inspiration and knowledge for future generations. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Sweet dream.